Hello, and welcome to another episode of AppSec Decoded. I'm Taylor Armerding, security advocate with the Synopsys Software Integrity Group, and today we're going to talk about software supply chain vulnerabilities, which are irresistibly attractive to cybercriminals. And the reason should be obvious. Instead of having to craft individual attacks on a single target, the supply chain offers them a way for a single attack to hit thousands, millions, or even billions of targets. The Log4Shell vulnerability in the Apache logging library Log4j is perhaps the highest profile recent example. Log4j is a link in a software supply chain that in too many cases, organizations didn't even know they were using. Tim Mackey, principal security strategist within the Synopsys Cybersecurity Research Center, has been an advocate for one of the best ways to track and eliminate vulnerabilities like that, a software bill of materials, or SBOM. Tim, thanks for joining us. Is there any chance that Log4Shell could be a positive game changer in software security by being the so-called wake-up call that scares organizations enough for them to make an SBOM a priority?
So there's a lot to unpack in that question. The first thing is, well, what would the SBOM actually accomplish?
Right.
So up front, we need to recognize that an SBOM, well, it stands for Software Bill of Materials, and it's fundamentally, an ingredient list, for lack of a better description, in a single file that represents what's in a piece of software. And today there's a little bit of squishiness around exactly what could be put in there, and there are standards around it, but as all of these new cyber attacks and the concept of software supply chains have kind of permeated industry, we see various vendors kind of setting their various flags around what an SBOM is all about. The key element is that an SBOM communicates the contents, that ingredients list, for what's in a piece of software. Nothing really more than that. It's not going to tell you whether or not you have unpatched vulnerabilities. That's another process. It's not going to tell you whether or not you have something that is quote unquote risky. That's another process. It is quite simply what is inside that piece of software. Now there's two different ways of looking at it. And you mentioned kind of a wake-up call. And I think that that's kind of a real challenge for a lot of organizations. If we look back at the Equifax and Apache Struts experience, right, that was a little bit of a wake-up call. If we look now at Log4Shell, what's causing people to kind of evaluate what the actual impact of open source, which is fundamentally the real component of this, software supply chain that people don't understand the most, is, well, what's in my software? How did it get there? And how am I patching it? So the SBOM itself will tell you what's in the software, but it won't tell you how to patch it. It won't tell you whether it has been patched. It could potentially give you misleading information if you're not quite careful. So it's more of a wake-up call for how am I actually owning and operating the software that I have? How is my patch management solution actually keeping up to date with the velocity of new vulnerabilities that are disclosed? Like last year, 2021, there was over 52 every single day. So I meant if you didn't deal with the first 52 today, tomorrow is another 52, and the day after that is another 52, and you're going to get quickly behind if you don't have something that is very agile with respect to patch management. And SBOM can contribute to that.
My understanding is that a lot of people sort of look at it, especially after President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity. He's basically mandated that at least federal agencies won't be allowed to buy software products if they don't have an SBOM, a software bill of materials, and which almost makes it sound like a silver bullet. If you have an SBOM, you're going to be okay. And one of the things that I've heard is that an SBOM isn't going to tell you what vulnerabilities exist necessarily, but it is going to tell you, for example, that with a simple database search, you can find out, oh yeah, I'm using Log4j. There's this big vulnerability in it. Now I know that I have to patch it. So isn't that all good?
So it is, but again, there's a bunch to unpack in there. Sure. And we'll start from the very top. The executive order that President Biden issued doesn't actually direct anyone to send in SBOMs or anything of that nature. What it did do is say, head of NIST, you need to go figure out what a definition of an SBOM is. head of NTIA, you need to go and figure out what these things are. And there's a chain of events, a sequence of activities that'll actually get to a point where there will be contract clauses associated with any software that's going into the US government that will say, if you don't have this, then this is the penalty for doing it. And here is the exception process for it. Right now, as we are recording this, that process has yet to hit its particular timeline in the executive order. That doesn't occur until May of 2022.
Right.
So today, software is going into the US government the same way that it always did. Now, if we look at a future state where an SBOM is actually going to be given for every piece of software, that means that an SBOM is going to have to adhere to the NTIA specification, which says that SPDX, Cyclone DX, and SWID are the way to do things. And again, they're inventory files, that's all they are. You're going to need to have one for every patch because you've changed the code.
Right.
Something may have changed. You're going to need it for every new piece of software. You're going to need it for every piece of software that you brought in. If you're just using pure open source software, you downloaded it from the internet, according to guidance from NIST, you don't need an SBOM for that, but you should be responsible for everything that's coming in under contract and so forth. So if you have that SBOM, now it comes into what your process is. So you said, hey, I can go do a simple query and I can find out everywhere that there's a log for J. And that is one of the things that you can definitely do with an SBOM, providing you have every single piece of software in your empire covered by some set of SBOMs.
Right.
And you have a mechanism to go and aggregate them all together and build that query. That future state where there's a mechanism where all of the SBOMs go into something that you can build a query, that doesn't exist yet.
Right.
So we have focused a little bit on the file, the SBOM, and thinking that it's like this magic bullet, and it kind of is if you think about it at small scale. But once you start talking about thousands of applications, where not everybody has code that's coming from, say, an IT provisioning process or a procurement process, how do you actually bring it all in?
Right.
And complexity ensues from there. So the first order of business is going to be OMB and the FAR Council has to go and define what the contract clauses are.
Right.
They have to go into effect whenever they go into effect. And then the US government will have some mandate that says, look, we've got this data and we have to go and do something with it.
Right.
All of the people who do business with the US government are going to be covered by that. That's where things are going to start to get real very quickly. We're a few months away from that, so it is going to change people's plans. That's kind of the way of today. Ask me in a couple months how this all plays out, and some of what I say will be right and some of what I say will be wrong. It's kind of crystal balling at this point.
Thank you for joining another episode of AppSec Decoded. I'm Taylor Armerding. Hope you'll join us the next time.